The best way to sell the next customer is make sure your first customer is literally crawling up on top of their house, screaming from the rooftop how great your solution is. That's how you sell number two.
Welcome to SaaS That App, building B2B Web Applications, the podcast where we share real-world stories, practical advice, and tech insights for those building or thinking about starting a tech-enabled business. I'm your co-host, Aaron Marchbanks.
And I'm Justin Edwards. Each week we bring you the stories, strategies, and insights you need to build your SaaS or tech-enabled business smarter, not harder. Let's dive right in.
Hello and welcome back to SaaS That App. Our guest today helped shape the early days of Apple and PayPal, and now he is betting big on Arizona becoming a tech hub. Don Fotsch is the co-founder and COO of Battery Detection Solutions AI, where he is leading a high-stakes effort using AI and robotics to detect and address and remove hazardous batteries from waste streams. He is also a founding member of the Arizona Venture Alliance and creator of the Arizona Nerd Network, which sounds awesome, where he is on a mission to make the desert the next frontier of tech innovation. So let's dig into how he has been building these platforms that save lives, supporting startups, and helping to put Arizona on the tech map. Don, welcome so much to the show.
Thanks. Great to be with you guys.
With me, as always, is my partner in crime, Justin, across the microphone, and we're going to be diving into all fun things here with Don. So Don, just kind of starting back at the beginning, I guess the beginning-ish, you had kind of a front row seat to some of the big tech moments and pillars in tech history with Apple in the 80s, and I know AOL and US Robotics in the 90s. Huge fan of US Robotics, by the way. Loved all my modems. PayPal in the early 2000s. So tell us a little bit what it was like watching that technology evolve from the inside over those early decades.
Sure. So, one of the things, first of all, I'm a mechanical engineer by background, okay, which we'll maybe touch on a few different points in the conversation. But after engineering school, I had in engineering school, which is something I'm very passionate about, a summer internship actually with John Deere as a manufacturing engineer, programming CNC machines, computer numerically controlled machines, et cetera. Worked there for about 4 or 5 years, finished up grad school, and then was pretty intent on going back to Deere. And then I was at Kellogg School, the Northwestern MBA school, finishing up full time. And this fruit company came to campus called Apple. And they're like, hey, we're changing the world. And so my dad was very excited about John Deere, like, oh, you're feeding the world. This will be an incredible career forever. And I was like, wow, changing the world, feeding the world. I don't know, this changing the world thing seems pretty cool.
Absolutely. No, that's fantastic. So how would you say then that all those lessons that you talked about, looking back, you connected some dots and now you're setting up shop in Arizona. How does that history kind of influence or affect how you're going about what's happening in Arizona now?
Well, I think that two things really jump out. I would say two themes. First one is the fundamental values here in Arizona. And then I think the other thing is what you might call largely untapped technical potential. And what I mean by that is if you came in from, planet Mars and you're part of Elon's, future thing and but you were from Mars, because maybe there are some folks there. And you came to the US, you heard about Arizona, you'd be like, wait, they got like one of the biggest, the only 3 Mayo Clinic locations in the country. Okay, they've got TSMC, largest semiconductor producer in the world. They got Intel, okay, and they're cranking out engineers at multiple schools, not the least of which is ASU, where they crank out 7,000 engineers a year, which is more than any other school in the country. And then if you said, you'd probably imagine, if you had a little bit of, tech background there in Mars, you'd say, hey, they must be like just birthing billion-dollar companies like crazy. And the truth is we've birthed some, but we should be birthing more because we have so much capacity, both the values and the technology, to build companies across industries, by the way, which is very important and a huge advantage that Arizona has is we're very diverse in our industries, particularly as we grow. We got everything from mining to health to sports and entertainment and gaming to, financial services to pick your favorite, construction stuff, real estate stuff. So very diverse economy. But the last point I'd reinforce is that manufacturing that kind of talent at scale. So we graduated ASU, more engineers than any other school in the country, is really a blessing and something we can, I think, harvest a lot more out of, coming out of all the schools in the following way, is that we're on to the fact that what technology does, regardless of industry, right, is it's a continued, it's like a ticket to continued productivity improvement. Fundamentally, that's what technology is. It's what it's always been. I think it's what it's always going to be. We're seeing a big burst of that with AI. And so to wrap all that up, the values here, coupled with the technical competency across an application across multiple industries, to me says, I would say comfortably in the next few decades, if you say what's going on left of the Mississippi in the United States in terms of just rocket growth with a lot of talent, this kind of ties into the nerd network piece, it's that combination of values and values first, and frankly having a little bit of the wisdom, even though we are state 48, we're kind of the youngest in the continental US, right? But knowing and kind of learning from our older siblings, that value stuff is important. Don't lose sight of that. Keep nurturing that, and couple that with the application of technology across industries is just an incredible seedbed for growing companies and scaling companies.
Yeah. So, it feels like you saw something there, or you have seen something there, and that's kind of what brought you there from the coast. But you mentioned the potential. Would you say that it is still currently untapped potential, and the mission is therefore to make it more known? Or is it to kind of keep it a hidden gem and just do the work there?
I'll give you a quick example of that is Axon. So Axon is a company in Scottsdale that is the leading company in what you might call neighborhood safety technology. So body cams, tasers, etc. for law enforcement, okay? That company was started by Rick Smith. He's a native Arizonan. It's an amazing Arizona story, currently public at 40 billion. But we want to be, I think, in success, the way we get even more like Axons and even more, like venture HR, as I mentioned, et cetera, is two things, right? So on top of the values, quality starts, and then become known as the state where it's easiest to scale. Okay, so you guys may know that Axon's in the midst of, it's actually been approved. They're working through a few last issues, but they have a whole new campus in North Scottsdale plan that's going to bring 5,000 new jobs, okay, to North Scottsdale area. And those jobs are, as you guys would know, they're basically tech jobs, 150K and up, 5,000 new jobs, one company, right? So you think about that, we want to be a place where ultimately, and this fundamentally, by the way, is the goal of the Nerd Network, is simply to, as I like to say, via SneakerNet or in real life, connect every builder throughout the state of Arizona, whether it's by experience, degree, both, bits, atoms, bend metal, write code, etc. Because why? Because the only thing better when you really need to scale and hire a lot more people than hiring the people that are qualified to do the job is hiring the people qualified to do the job that you already know.
So I guess I like the idea of Arizona as kind of this emerging hub. I think that the values that go into that is super key. Obviously, it's done something to make itself an attractor. If you say 72% of people who are living in Arizona weren't from there, it's done something to draw in a lot of people, and a lot of those people sound like they're talented and starting companies and doing really cool things. Do you know, or do you have a speculation as to kind of what the role of what's causing that? What's causing it to be so attractive to so many people that it's having such an influx and such a draw?
I think the core things are really, I would say there's a couple, but one of them is many of the people will say things that are the first thing out of their mouth will be either something related to the sun, but the point is the consistency of lived intentional values here is very attractive. And oftentimes the people who come, in addition to mentioning the sun, it's an easy place to live a healthy life, hiking, etc. by the way, until I got here, I really was unfamiliar with, like, what is hiking? I know walking. And then I learned that hiking is just walking on a path where there's some rocks that you better pay attention to. Otherwise, you're going to, like, you're going to end up doing a face plant, which isn't good. So I guess you get a little more balance. You get a little more balance work with the hiking. But, all kidding aside, I think the values is a piece, but they won't use that word. They'll say things like people are really welcoming, right? They'll say things like the first thing out of people's mouths often here is, how can I help you? Knowing now what you're doing, let me connect you with these couple people, right? And I think that but the other piece that's kind of more, call it the work in the lunch bucket piece, is that I would say there's probably 10 industries, which is pretty wild, including things as, a lot of people are familiar, for example, with mining. I wasn't. We have like very significant companies here in Arizona in that whole space, let alone healthcare with Mayo and some other things. But the interesting thing is when you have a place where, okay, the values are good, it's an enjoyable place to live, people are very welcoming, you're seeing the sun, and I'm no doctor, but I think we all know there's something to like that vitamin D and that physiology of seeing the sun, with some frequency. And then the last piece is to have, there's just a lot of builders in a lot of different industries. So it's like you can come from almost any place and say, wow, and by the way, I think one of the most attractive things, I think one of you guys mentioned it just a minute ago, but the number of people who are talented young people who are already, as they say, found their person, have young kids, looking to have young kids. And I see this a lot, like through the Nerd Network, which is now at 445. But the number of people who will say things like this, I'll give you one very specific instance. A mom who happens to have 2 young children, and she said she's a developer for Stitch Fix, okay, a software developer living in New York. And she had she said, I was here in Arizona, Don, a couple of years ago with my husband and our first child. Now they have 2. And I saw the following walking down the street. And it was a mom and a dad and a couple kids and the grandparents. And she said, which I just thought was interesting, right? She said, I looked at that and I said, that is something I will never see where I live in New York. And I'm not saying she's right. I got nothing against New York. I got friends who are Yankees fans. It's all good. But she was literally like, I'm moving to Arizona.
You're obviously, well connected and everything, having helped found the AVA and the Nerd Network, and I'm sure that through these networks, you're hearing of, I'm assuming, these emerging sectors, robotics, clean tech, industrial AI, things along those lines. And you obviously have a lot of history in industry in general. And so just kind of curious, because we do spend a lot of time on the show talking about startups and people trying to get whatever their business or their SaaS or whatever off the ground. What would you say, to those emerging companies, people who are trying to get the businesses started in those industries? What is like a big blind spot or the major issue that you see in some of these early developing organizations and companies?
Yeah, I would say a couple, but there's one that kind of trumps all of them in terms of, like, I always think about these kind of questions like, okay, if we had the perfect data and like a histogram of, okay, what's the first issue, what's the second issue, et cetera. And I would say that the first issue by a pretty significant margin is if we had all the data on people who successfully start up companies, okay, a couple of things would be true. And it's good for people to know this. One is the overwhelming majority fail. Okay, that's number one. And then number two, to me, and the failure kind of go back to oftentimes the values, but we don't need to redo that. But Elon says this often, Steve would say it, Palmer Luckey, Grace Hopper, pick your favorite one. So number one is, like, you got to understand that the probability of success is not high. So then the question is, well, what can I do to increase the odds that I'm successful? And I would say if I could reach into the minds of and hearts of the founders and potential founders in Arizona and just flip one bit, the one bit I would flip is go work at a company before you start a company. It's kind of like To use the sports analogy, I know people joke, we always joke, he says, two things you can't find in tech. This is kind of a Silicon Valley joke. You can't find faith and you can't find sports. So the reason I mention that is the sports thing, it's kind of like somebody coming out of, I don't know, high school and saying, I want to win a Super Bowl. Because like having a successful startup is kind of like, like the odds aren't high. Okay. So it's like a Super Bowl. And then you're like, okay, so what's your NFL experience? And they're like, I don't have any. I want to win a Super Bowl. You're like, okay, got it. And you're like, okay, the reason I mention this is for a couple very kind of obvious reasons. And that's not to say every once in a while you have a Mark Zuckerberg. There's nothing wrong with that, right? And that's good. But you don't want to be telling everybody, hey, just major in entrepreneurship. Like, no offense, but what is that? Right? Like you're going to build something. You're going to build something and you're going to sell something. So I would say the first thing is like, hey, let's make sure that we're doing a good job. And by the way, this is why it's such a gift and so important to have your Axons get to $1 trillion, to have your Mayo Clinics, to have your TSMCs. Why? Because those are our Googles and our Apples and our Salesforces, and that's basically our NFL, right? That's where you go, you get your experience. And as I like to say, to summarize it, when the economy's crappy, people run into the big companies if they got bills to pay. And then when the economy's good, if they want to scratch the itch to go start a company, then they come out of those companies with really good fundamental, experience. So I think that's kind of, I would say, in my experience thus far, probably the biggest thing. And then the next thing is, you guys have probably heard of this before, but for those who want to go, like they squirreled away a little money, it was probably two things to quickly touch on. One is the early money. You often get like, well, I have this idea and and I need an engineer and then I need some money. I'm like, okay, well, here's an idea. Why don't you become an engineer? And I've literally done this actually with some of our kids, and people think can't be done. And our oldest daughter did it. She graduated in American Studies from Cal Berkeley, was on 2 national championship swim teams. Okay. And after a few years, not making enough money in sports related stuff, coaching, etc., she went and got a data science certificate at ASU. And now she's like, Dad, she's like 3 years into being a data analyst, data engineer. And she's like, I'm making more money than I could have ever imagined making in my life. I'm like, yeah, and you're only a couple of years, into it. So we always kind of start with the values piece. Then we say, hey, get some experience. The bulk of the people, like Steve Jobs' first job was at Atari on the production line. Okay. Bill Gates' first job was at TRW. People, you would think that a lot of people think, oh, he just started Apple and then that guy started Microsoft. It's like, it doesn't tend to work that way. And then I think when it comes to like some of let's say that you have a bit of experience and they have a little bit of your own money, but you need a little more money, is reminding people the thing people are betting on early on in your startup is not your product or service. People think like, oh, I'm going to convince them that this product in mining or this product in financial services or, whatever is like the best thing. And I say, they will never care as much as you do. And that's the way it should be. That's why you're the founder and they're a potential investor. So just remember in the early stages, they're betting and investing in you. Okay. They're not investing in your product or your service. So when you understand that, you come back and you say, okay, make a list of all your relatives, make a list of all the people you went to school with, make a list of the people you worked with. Why? Because these are all people who know you, and then you can save a lot of time, frankly, talking to a bunch of people who may be willing to talk to you, but aren't likely to invest. And then so that's kind of the money piece early on. The last piece, which is kind of the first execution piece, is reminding, I was just talking to a founder here in town, and he was like, hey, I've got my first, he's doing property management software. Okay. And he says, I got my first customer and I've got my first deployment, but I'm, wrestling with how do I balance my time between getting more customers and building this thing out, right? And I said, his name's Andy. I say, Andy, really good news for you. He's like, what? You don't have to worry about selling to anybody else. You have a customer, right? He says, yeah. I said, what you want to do, the best way to sell the next customer is make sure your first customer, they call this the rule of one, right? Get one customer and get one deployment. And when that customer is literally crawling up on top of their house, screaming from the rooftop how great your solution is, that's how you sell number two. So hopefully that kind of paints the picture.
No, that's absolutely beautiful. We work with a lot of SaaS founders, bootstrapped and otherwise, small tech companies, small tech founders, and that's super true words, man. You're speaking to my soul right now. I love it.
Well, and Justin, I'm sure you both know the other thing that, because this is a wonderful place to live, we do get at times too many people who, quote, want to help, and no offense, but they've never played the game. So, and this is, we love the energy, we appreciate that's kind of rooted in the values of being welcoming. But one of the things I often find myself with some of the young founders I'm helping and have gotten to know is like, just make sure that if somebody's helping you, that you understand what makes them qualified to help you, right? It's great that they want to help. Okay, being helpful, that's great. But if you want to get to the Super Bowl, then you want to be coached by somebody who's been there. And I think that's, and by the way, a related piece to that's just so like, this is like a movie, and somebody up there's writing a heck of a script, and we're executing it. But I'll just give you one example related to that. We just had a wonderful gentleman named Chris Coe, and Chris did his research on where he wanted to live. Okay, he's like Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, Has one son. I think the one son's actually at ASU. But anyway, so Chris is like 20 years, just short of 20 years at EA Sports. Like you guys know, like games, like EA Sports. You don't. It's like Apple. You don't have to say that twice, right? And he comes in. He's been here 7 months. He's like, Don, we are so happy. They're like carefree, a little north of North Scottsdale, right? Cave Creek, I think it's Cave Creek. But anyway, and he said, look, I love what's going on in Arizona. I think Arizona can be like a third hotspot for gaming in the United States. And he's like, Don, there's only two. One's in Florida, and I forget where the other one is. And then he rattles off all the things going on, like in our universities and other things that he knows are here that are consistent with being an incredible gaming hub. Right. And so he's what we would call in sports, he's a player coach. So he's coming to our Saturday, he's in the Nerd Network. And at our Saturday meetup this Saturday, he's going to, during our huddle, we do a short huddle. It's mostly just people connecting with other builders. But during our huddle, he's going to talk about why he thinks, how he sees Arizona as a next gaming hub. And then there's a 19-year-old founder here named Sandul, who's got a set of games called Legion Games that he has 80 million users a month. And then Sandul's going to talk a little bit about what he's doing.
No, that's very cool. So lots of draw, obviously. I'm interested. I want to dig into the actual network a little bit too, but also I want what you're doing, what your take may be too on new problems that are being solved. What are the new, what kind of solutions are people working on right now in Arizona?
Yeah, so I'll give you two. One that's still a little bit under wraps, but I can certainly give you the core of what they're doing. But the first one I'll mention is Axio.ai. Have you by chance heard of this?
I have not.
They have something called Luminosity Labs. Okay, and what Luminosity Labs is innovation labs at the university, and they'll take on projects from industry, and then students within the Luminosity Labs team, can work on projects, which is great. So Axio.ai, the reason I mentioned Luminosity Labs, there's a guy named, technically he would be Dr. Mark Knopfel, but he's a very approachable Codes at Night founder, true tech founder. So he doesn't like to be called doctor. But Mark Knopfel is the founder, and he ran for years and was actually an ABOR. There's student representatives on ABOR, which is basically the board that oversees our public universities, NAU, ASU, and U of A down in Tucson. Arizona Board of Regents is what that stands for, ABOR. So he was a student regent while he was at school. He's a PhD in some combination of like computer science, AI, etc. And long story short, his company is focused on and just deployed their first university on the first native AI-based personalized learning system. Okay, so their first deployment is using AI, so native AI that then they're tailoring, right, to literally both essentially kind of, front to back deliver a platform for orchestrate planning and then delivering a curriculum at really any school, but they're starting with universities. And the thing that's awesome about it is I know this from my time in Silicon Valley, right? Is that from a economic point of view, the heroes, like you want to set up the system so that the tech founders, like real tech founders, and he would be an example, are the heroes. You know why? Because that's the hardest role. But when they're successful, we all really, really benefit a lot. So Mark's literally coding in the middle of the night kind of founder. Okay. And what Axio.ai, you can check out the website. But in a nutshell, it takes the power of AI and applies it to both the kind of planning of the curriculum as well as the delivery of the first personalized learning system, which in kind of simple terms, I'll put it this way, as a parent of 6, who made it through all the primary school, all the stuff, is the thing to me it's amazing about it is it's personalized, meaning like you can say to it as you're doing your homework or whatever, hey, I got to go to baseball practice now. And when you come back that night, it'll, among the things it'll guide you to whatever tonight's assignment is. By the way, how'd the baseball game go? Like it's very tailored and personalized. But the thing that it achieves, which again, you don't have to be a parent, but we all have been through school, is literally mastery learning. Okay, which is kind of like a phrase from the old days. But what that means is you can't progress with any course or anything until you've actually achieved a level of proficiency in the current like module, if you will, right? And the thing that we can all appreciate is that if you zoom out for a second, let's put it this way, we'll be gentle. The best and the brightest engineers coming out of school or coming, self-made, they are not stampeding into government. Well, now they are because of Doge, but we're not going to get into that. But they haven't been, right? Nobody says, oh, I can't wait to go work in government at any level who's really technical. Okay. And they don't tend to go into financial services, or they don't tend to go into education. They don't tend to go into healthcare. Why? Because all of those industries are kind of notorious for being laggards in technology adoption. So here's a guy in our own backyard, homegrown, Mark Knopfel. He's coding in the middle of the night and he's deployed. He went to his first university is deployed. And you guys will totally get this. He says, Don, I go to the conference. It's now coming up again. It's called like Global Silicon Valley or something. It's in San Diego. He got voted last year most fundable startup. But he said, it's a lot about education. He says, everybody's talking about the power of AI in education. And we were the only ones with working code. And he said, you know what I did? I made my developers work the booth. He said, Don, we were the only booth where people were backed up. And you guys know, like we say this in the nerd network, a lot of nerds, they say, oh, I'm an introvert. And I say, there's some people who say an introvert is just an extrovert who hasn't been asked the right question. Because you guys know when you ask people about, right? So that's a very exciting one. Like, it's as far as I know, and I think this is pretty close to being kind of likely to be true. But I'm pretty confident that Mark's solution and platform, personalized learning system platform, is literally the first deployed, platform in a real school, like in a real university. And there's a lot of talk in academia. There's a lot of talk about AI's potential. But he's actually building it out. So that's one example. Another one, that. By the way, I should mention just one other quick thing. So are you guys familiar by chance with homeschooling at all?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I wasn't homeschooled, but one of the things that I've learned, which is fascinating, is very much tied to the potential of Mark's company. So this solution definitely could very comfortably, and I think it will, inside of 2 years, become one of the leading, if not the leading, platforms for homeschooling folks. Okay, and why is that important? Well, here's what you learn, which I didn't know, from people who are some of our founders here. There's a company called Inked Greetings. Andrew and Sammy Ekmark are the founders of that. And the reason they come to mind is Andrew's played basketball at Stanford. When I met him, he's not an inch taller than me. I'm 6'1". I'm like, you played D1 basketball. Like, how's that? He's like, Don, I was homeschooled. And I didn't know what that meant. And what he then went on to say is, he said, Don, when you're homeschooled, you're only doing school 3 to 4 hours a day. About half of what, if you go to school. He says, well, what do you think I was doing for the extra 3 to 4 hours a day? So the reason I mention that is, imagine that not only do we have something with Mark's company, Axio.ai, that's the first personalized learning system deployed initially at the university level, but when you think about that type of efficiency and platform supporting homeschooling, it becomes yet another thing to make it easier to homeschool, kids, right? And then you're thinking, okay, well, now they've got all this extra time per day. And it wouldn't surprise, you guys or me, that then Arizona turns around and says, hey, well, that's intellectual development. Why don't we do since we know that extra time's coming for a lot more, young people, let's do a startup on, social development. Let's do a startup on physical development. Like some of the basis schools, more technical high schools and stuff. One of the challenges I hear from parents there is like, oh, there's not really much in terms of sports, but we're in a great position with things like Axio. You end up with that thing being a rocket of success. And then you have derivative companies, that are like solving the social development, et cetera. So I'll switch over to one other one that I think is also incredibly exciting. So the reason I paint that picture is there's a gentleman named Josh Gruba who's starting a company called Pack Energy. And Josh is essentially looking at the whole power generation and distribution, systems really globally, but just say focused on the US, and saying that's not smart either. So there's no like underlying, like just platform. So he's in the very early stages of literally building out the platform for the management of energy production and energy distribution. So it's much more scalable, et cetera. So those are just like two examples. And Josh has been, I think, at least 2 to 3 maybe decades in the whole power and energy, space. So there's two.
That's fantastic. Yeah, there's a lot of blue water or greenfield, as they say, in that space. So Don, any last thoughts you want to share? Any last words of wisdom for startups or folks that you want to bring to Arizona, or perhaps keep out of Arizona so that they're not muddying the water?
Well, that's, it's funny you mention that, because I have two final thoughts. So one is, I joke with people, I say, let's see, I got to say this in a way that my mother would be proud of me. People that are arrogant and you don't want to work with, our density of those kind of people is really low in Arizona. And I joke with people, so those are the people we want to keep out. And we're doing a really good job of it. Because I joke with people, we all know people that will say they have a very positive self-image, but don't always read the room very well. And I joke about that only because it's nice to, we all know those kind of people. And like, as the saying goes, God makes the sun to shine on us all. But this is not a place where if you're one of those kind of people, you're going to be very happy. Because we all like to be around people kind of like us, at least sometimes. And so I think this is actually kind of a funny byproduct of the good values, is you get some people come and they're a little too full of themselves and they end up leaving, which is just like a company, testimony to good culture. But I think the thing that stands out the most is just kind of a wrap-up point, particularly for, as you say, both the builders and the founders, is one is, be grateful. We have a lot to be grateful for. Like, show up grateful And I'll just say, we were talking about Josh Grubaugh, he mentions this often, is that, be the culture, particularly in the form of not being afraid to ask for help. And when you can help, being generous with your ability and capacity to help. Because in a nutshell, that's Arizona. And, if you didn't have that, as I joke with people, in California, there's a lot of things I love about California, still go there often, have a few investments, blah, blah, blah. But, in California, you can't get everybody to agree literally that the sun's coming up tomorrow, And in our case, being that younger sibling, state 48 out of, the continental, we're really in a good position to take that welcoming culture, the kind of the high integrity welcoming culture and kind of our dominant nerd gene in every day, do our best, the great days, as you say, never too high, never too low, but always grateful and always willing to help.
Don, it's been an absolute pleasure. A lot of great advice, a lot of great insight. Really, really appreciate you bringing your knowledge and also just helping to guide the next generation, as it were. So big thank you to our guest, Don Fotsch, among many other things, the founding member of the Arizona Venture Alliance and creator of the Arizona Nerd Network. Don, how can people reach you?
The simplest way to reach me is on LinkedIn. I'm there and I'm very very present. So people can ping me and I'm on there quite a lot. So I'm happy to be pinged and happy to help in any way I can.
Fantastic. We will send people to your LinkedIn then. Thank you, as always, also to my co-host, Justin.
So, Aaron, I got to ask, did Don convince you to move to Arizona for your move to the South?
Oh, my gosh, 110%. It has been nothing but miserable weather in the state of Iowa for so long now, and my wife and I were just talking about it again this morning, that with the kiddo off to college, it is time to find warmer climes.
I hear Arizona's pretty nice. You might consider it. And you got that Midwest nice thing going on as well, so you'll fit right in.
Well, guys, thank you again. And for the rest of you, we will see you all next time on SaaS That App. Thanks for cruising along with us on SaaS That App. We hope you grabbed some insights that were inspiring, actionable, or at least entertaining.
If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review.
Until next time, keep building, keep growing, and keep those apps sassy.